So a couple of weeks ago, I set myself the task of creating a retro-style action figure of a character from the Games Workshop IP, a Space Marine. And in that episode, I created a few different versions of it, a few different factions in a few different colours, just for myself, just as a little experiment, kind of imagining what it would look like if back in the early 90s, Games Workshop had licensed out their IP to a company like Kenner or Playmates or Trendmasters, and just what that would have looked like. And the response, not only from the toy community, but also from the Games Workshop community as well, was very, very positive. People really seemed to like him. And the comments on that video was just full of people suggesting other characters that I could create. So sticking with that same idea, in today's video, I'm going to show you how I recently created another figure from the Games Workshop IP based on a Games Workshop character that ended up being one of my favourite toys that I've ever made. So I'm going to show you my whole creative process, how I come up with the idea, how I sculpt the thing, how I paint it, where I draw inspiration from, all of that. And how I combined all of them different techniques to create myself a retro style action figure based on an old school Games Workshop Space Hulk Genestealer. So if that sounds like a bit of you, then as always, sit back, make sure you're comfy, and get yourself strapped in for a brand new episode of Retro Reimagined here on Slimehouse TV. Let's do what we do. Now, just so that we're all on the same page, I think it's probably helpful if I explain a little bit about what a Genestealer even is, because I know that not everybody that watches my videos are as into Oldhammer as I am. But basically, in the futuristic world of Warhammer 40,000, there's this very aggressive alien race called tyranids that, aesthetically at least, look very reminiscent of the classic Geiger alien xenomorph. Like, in my opinion, you could put any tyranid next to any old school Kenner alien action figure and they would very much look like straight up distant cousins.
Torch, bug brain!
Alien invasion problem? Send in the Marines!
Now, there's lots of different types of tyranids in the world of Warhammer. They're like insects, they come in different shapes and sizes, but the one that I'm taking a look at in today's video, that I'm using as the reference for this figure, is one called a Genestealer. Now, the Genestealers and the Genestealer cults are miniatures that have been around a long time in Warhammer, and there's a few different variations of them, but the one that I'm going to try and recreate in today's video for this project is the type that came with the old Games Workshop Space Hulk game. Or Sean Hulk if you want this super rare one-off custom version that I've got. Now, this game came out in 1989. It features Genestealers fighting Imperial Terminators, which I'll no doubt talk about in a different video because I want to make some of them as well at some point. Heroes and aliens swinging it out in a giant abandoned spaceship called a Space Hulk. It's a very iconic game within the world of Warhammer. Fans still love it to this day, and it's had a couple of different revamps over the years, but the one that I've got here is the first edition. If you want to find out more about this game as well, I'll link below a couple of videos that my friends have made about it. One from Jordan Sorcerer, who talks all about the history of the game, and then another from Dave over at MS Paints, who recently painted up an entire set of miniatures from 2nd edition Space Hulk. Two very dope videos that go way more in depth than I am right here, so make sure you go and check them out. But what's important for us right now, for this toy making project, is the Genestealer miniatures that this game came with. So these small 3-piece and a stand, injection moulded dark blue little guys are honestly one of my favourite Games Workshop models of all time. And when I first made those Space Marine figures and I was thinking about the idea of creating an enemy to go alongside them, these Space Hulk Genestealers are the first thing that sprung to mind. And also just looking at these guys and thinking how cool they would be recreated in a beefed up Kenner alien / Playmate / Trendmaster style just feels like something that needed to happen. So it was time to actually strap myself to the iPad and start sculpting this Genestealer action figure. And as always, I was using my go-to app, the one that I sculpt everything that I do in, Nomad Sculpt, which for anybody that isn't aware is just a very cheap app that you can buy from the store on any Apple device or tablet now. It was about £20 last time that I checked, just a one-off payment and then you've got it for life. It's very intuitive and I picked it up very quick once I started using it. Now, prior to YouTube, I was a freelance illustrator. I've also done lots of special effects for movies and things, so I have done a ton of jobs where I needed to understand anatomy and muscle structure and physicality and weight distribution and all that sort of stuff, so I did have a little bit of a head start. Chances are though, if you download this app on your tablet and start moving shapes around, providing that you've got a device that can handle it, you'll really surprise yourself with what you can create fairly quick. I will warn you though, once you start it does get pretty addictive. I've also been a big vintage toy collector for most of my life, but once I started getting real deep into the toy making stuff and worked out that I could pretty much just make anything that I could ever want, vintage toys for me definitely took a bit of a backseat. I mean, I still love them obviously, I still travel around picking them up, I still collect them, but there's no feeling like putting something on your shelf that you've sculpted and printed and painted yourself. Being around vintage toys for so many years though has definitely helped me understand what makes a toy feel retro. I feel like I've got a real good understanding of the proportions of those kind of 80s and 90s toys and what makes them feel like they could have existed in that era. And although sometimes I do add a little bit more detail and I have them a little bit more refined than they would have been back then, primarily it's always that old school look that I'm trying to go for over everything else, and this Tyranid Genestealer was no different. So I'm about halfway through the sculpt on this thing, and one of the flavours, one of the vibes that I really want to bring across with this figure is taking inspiration from an old 90s toy line called Trendmasters. Now I have spoke about this company before. In the 90s they were killing it. I've showcased their figures many times on this channel. They did all the Independence Day toys, they did all the 90s Godzilla figures, and whenever they took an IP they would get one of the characters and then just make it feel like it was on steroids. When they did the Godzilla toys they took all the Toho designs and then gave them a real comic book feel. Some of them even had like weapons and that kind of thing. But my personal favourite Trendmasters line is one called Alien Space Hunters, and they kind of did like their own knockoff figures of Alien and Predator, but they were way bigger, they were way more chunky, they were kind of transparent, they had a lot of character, and I really love those toys, so I want to take a little bit of inspiration from them and almost like think, what would it be like if Trendmasters got the Games Workshop license, and if they were particularly making a Genestealer figure, what would their toy look like? So I feel like I'm kind of getting there. I do need to think about this figure's weight distribution though and how it'll stand up, because the original OG design only really works while it's stuck to a stand. The original Genestealer figure has got these little tiny feet. It's also very hunched forward with these four arms, and unless I put it on a base, which I don't want to because it's an action figure, not a minifigure for wargaming, I'm going to have to extend them little feet at the bottom and then get these arms at the back and bring them backwards so it kind of like holds everything with the weight in the middle. I think I've got it sorted though, so I'm going to keep on working on it, but so far very happy with how it's looking, and yeah, very much excited to get this printed. So it's gone 2 AM in the morning, I'm very tired, I've been working on this thing for hours, but I'm real happy because I've pretty much got the whole thing sorted. I've got him in a really nice stance, like kind of crouching forward. I sorted out the weight distribution issue. His hands are at the back and it feels like all the weight's going to be in the middle, which is exactly what I want. And what I'm going to do now is all the battle damage and the texturing and the scarring and that kind of thing. I never like when you see a 3D model and they've used the symmetry tool for like damage and scuffs and marks and that kind of thing. I don't ever think it looks organic. I feel like it's lazy personally. So I never want to do that. I never want to phone it in. So what I'm going to do now is just spend a bit more time doing all the scuffs and the battle damage and the texturing and adding that like final layer of character to it, and then I'll come back tomorrow and do its articulation because it's way too late now for me to be concentrating on that. But I feel like I nailed that Trendmaster aesthetic. I'm really happy with it and I can't wait to see what it's going to look like when it's printed. I'm absolutely buzzing. Very happy, very productive evening, but yeah, want to try and get it finished now because time is ticking. So once I'd got the thing all sculpted and I was happy with how it was looking, it was off to the printing stage. So for this, first of all, I had to put it into a program called Chi2Box. A couple of people asked me before what this program was that I was using. This is just a free program that anyone can download, and this is what I use to put all the supports on it and get it all ready and sliced before it goes to the actual printer. The printer that I was using for this, as always, is the ELEGOO Saturn that I got very kindly sent to me from ELEGOO, as well as the resin that I used for this as well, which was a really nice grey ABS. ABS is a type of resin that just has a little bit more flex to it, and it's much better for using for action figures and stuff rather than like more cheaper brittle resins. So I filled the printer up with the ABS and set everything running, and I had to print this thing in several parts because of how big it was. But after about 18 hours I had everything that I needed, so from here it was off to the stage where I soak everything in hot water, get the supports removed, and then put everything in the UV curing machine. So when you 3D print things in resin and you take all the little supports off, you get left with little marks and holes. So what I do when I get to this stage is sand away any of them little imperfections so that when it's all painted I can have the surface as smooth and as flawless as possible. I also make these figures with simple articulation pegs that just hold in with friction, and although I try and measure everything perfectly in the Sculpting app, when you print these things in resin sometimes they can warp ever so slightly, so this is also a good chance for me to clean up anything that's not quite fitting together right. So there he is, all printed, all sanded, all prepared and that kind of thing. The next stage is to get this guy primed and painted, start getting some colour on him. Now I'm going to go with the traditional classic purple and blue Genestealer colours that were on the Space Hulk box, but the way that I want to do it is not just put down a normal basic blue, I want it to look a little bit like metallic. There's a few different reasons why I want to go down that route. Number one, because I always like to kind of challenge myself when I do one of these figures. Not only is it a challenge to sculpt it and to get all the articulation right and everything, and as you can see, like side note, the articulation has worked absolutely perfect, which I'm really happy about because this is a figure that I wasn't sure if it was going to balance properly, like I said. But I always like to challenge myself when it comes to the colour and stuff and try new things, and although I have done something like this similar before, I want this to look even better. Now, as you know, I'm very inspired by the Kenner Aliens figures. That like goes without saying. I've talked about them many times on this channel, and I want to incorporate a little bit of that kind of flavour into the colour scheme. But I'm also a big fan, not so much of the figures, but of the colour schemes that they used on them, of the old Bugs Life Pixar figures. Now, whenever I see them figures when I'm at a toy fair or a toy shop or anything like that, I'm always drawn to the colours that are on them. And there's a real nice like metallic / iridescent blue that they used on those toys that I want to try and incorporate a little bit onto this Genestealer. Now, I've got a few different options of ways that I could go with it. The first option is just to hit it with a spray paint. Now, I've had this spray paint since I was about 15. I used to buy these off a guy real cheap, like a couple of quid a can, but he only ever had chrome metallic colours, and for some reason all these years later I've still got a couple cans left. So this is a full can. It does work because I've done a little test with it, but it's like obviously car paint, and that makes it like a whole different thing. If I've got to do any cutting in on this figure, which I always have to do, I have to like do some little cutting, fine details after. The only way I can cut in with this colour is if I like spray it into a little pot and then quickly use it before it dries, and I don't really want to go down that route. I've also got the option of mixing my own metallic blue. I'm thinking if I use the metallic silver from the Pro Acryl set and then mix that with a bit of Alclad, which I haven't used much of, but when I have, it's really, really good. It leaves things looking very pearlescent. So I'm thinking if I mix a bit of this with some silver and then some blue contrast paint, mix all that up, I should get some kind of like metallic blue colour. I don't know, but hopefully by the time that I catch back up with you, I will have made my decision of like what direction I'm going to go in, because yeah, right now, I'm not fully sure. So I decided to start off by using a matte black base coat, just using an army painter rattle can, making sure that I hit it from all angles to get good coverage. Also, with it being winter now and a bit colder, I like to soak my cans of spray paint in some warm water first, just for 10 minutes or so. I've had nightmare situations before when I haven't done this, and the cans can be real cold and the paint ends up coming out thick and gloopy, which kills the nozzle and also messes up the model. So yeah, if you're spraying in cold weather, just something to keep in mind, because cans of paint in winter can be very temperamental. Now, loads of people were asking me in my previous video what spray booth I were using, and I actually did do a whole video showcasing this thing in a previous episode, but to any new subscribers that didn't catch that, this is the Bartsharp SB05 large waterfall spray booth. So I bought this thing myself. I didn't get it sponsored or anything like that, but once I'd received it, I did get chatting to the Bartsharp company, who have since then been very generous in sending me out some gifted stuff, both for myself and also to give away to you lot as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the video, but what I wanted to show you right now is my brand new spray gun that they've sent me to try. So this is a Bartsharp 183 airbrush. Now, I've only ever used an Iwata, so I were keen to have a go with something else, and I've always wanted multiple airbrushes anyway, because when you're doing airbrushing, they so often get clogged up and you have to take them all apart and clean them. You also might be using different colours and you don't want to have to keep constantly washing them out and changing back and forth. All stuff that can take you out of the zone and really slow down your workflow when you're trying to concentrate. So I wanted to be able to help speed up mine a little bit by getting a second one to use. So although I had a few options of how I could paint this thing, I decided to go with the idea of mixing my own metallic blue colour. No masking, no 15-year-old rattle cans or anything like that. I decided that I would just spray the whole thing with the airbrush and hope for the best. So I mixed all them colours that I spoke about earlier, making sure that I had a thin one that could go through the airbrush, and then also a thicker one for later when I needed to cut back in, and started laying down thin coats over the matte black base primer. Now, whenever I mix my own colours, I just eyeball them and make sure that I make up plenty so that I don't run out halfway through and have to try and mix the same colour again. And although sometimes it takes a while to get the right colour that I need, this one was pretty much perfect right off the bat. I did end up having to mix it a little bit darker later, but not too much, and considering it was a very specific metallic colour that I was after, it could have ended up taking a while to get it right, but it just really didn't, and I was very happy with how it was looking once it all started to dry. The airbrush that Bartsharp sent me as well was also really nice and smooth to use. It didn't clog up or anything like that. It felt really good and weighted in the hand as well, and is decent quality. All things that were pretty surprising because this gun is literally like a third of the price of the Iwata that I normally use. And other than the little spanner that it came with not fitting very well, which I did feed back to Bartsharp after using it, and they said that they're going to look into getting that changed, I don't have any complaints, and I'm really looking forward to using this thing on more figures and projects in the future. Now after all the blue were down, I moved on to the purple colour. I wanted to paint this thing in the real traditional purple and blue Genestealer colour scheme. I know nowadays the official Games Workshop tyranids that you see are always painted in like a bone pink creamy kind of colour, but as you know I always love that OG look, so for this I went with a Monument Hobbies Pro Acryl paint called Plum. And I used this on his head and then also on his hands and fingers. I also then added it to all the exposed muscle kind of areas. I don't really know what you would call this, but any of the parts of his body that are like flexible and not armoured, all those little bits that look like piping, all the fleshy parts, and all these areas did take a couple of coats to completely cover over the dark metallic. I then went back and used the thicker version of the dark metallic colour that I used to cut into that, and then also used that same paint to colour in that piece of armour that runs down the centre of the Genestealer's forehead. So after that, it was time to move on to the claws on his hands and his feet, and for these I were kinda stuck because I didn't want to do them all bone coloured because they're really front and centre on the figure, and I thought that they might be a bit distracting if they're too bright. My normal go-to for these kind of things, horns and stuff, is like paint them all in a bleached bone and then airbrush them darker towards the end, but I really didn't want to do that here, and after mentioning this to my friend Dandos and asking for his advice, he suggested that I should do it the other way around, paint them all in a dark brown, but then airbrush the tips of them with the lighter colour, and I'm so happy that I did this because I felt like it's exactly what they needed. So once that was all done, all that was left to do was tidy everything up, cut everything back, and leave it all to dry overnight so I could give the whole thing a finishing satin lacquer the following morning and get it all ready for his close-up and his final reveal shots. So there you have it, my old school Genestealer inspired retro style action figure, and I've got to say, and I've probably said it a few times now in this video, this is by far one of my favourite toys that I've ever made. Also, in terms of trying to create a figure that was like Trendmaster / Kenner style, I really think that I achieved it. Like, if this was released back in the 90s and Trendmaster did it, I really think this is what it would have probably looked like. I also really dig how the blue came out, the metallic blue, and I could have just gone with like a normal dark royal blue kind of colour and that would have looked cool, but adding that little bit of metallic to it, that little bit of iridescence, it really made it feel like an action figure, and as you know, if you watch these videos, that's always the look that I'm going for. As you can also see as well, I created this one completely off camera, I just did this on my own, but this is based on the old Kenner soldier alien figure that kind of had like a frosty transparent blue look to it. So what I did with this one is I printed it in a transparent blue ELEGOO resin that's a little bit more brittle than the ABS, but it's only going to be displayed on a shelf so it don't matter. So I printed this in a couple of parts in the transparent blue, and then once that were all done, I dusted on the top of it with some Midwinter Minis blue Colourforge spray paint and then some white. And standing side by side next to that old Kenner soldier figure, I really feel like this is a worthy tribute. I also give it some silver teeth like that figure. Obviously they don't have eyes on the old Kenner aliens, but I decided to go for like a bright red bloodshot colour, and I think that works really well. Reminds me of the veins that was on that old flying Kenner alien queen. I also love as well that with those old Kenner toys, they would repackage them in different colours, different variants, and create like a whole new figure out of one sculpt. So I really like that idea as well. I think that's really cool, and I would love to be able to like print these out in different colours and try different variations of them. Maybe even like the transparent green mantis Kenner alien. That would look awesome. If we're talking about scale as well, how these things scale up next to one of the Marines that I made, I've got one right here. I've actually got two right here, so we can have a look. And I feel like they scale up next to them very, very nicely. I did initially print one of these out a little bit too small. It looked awesome, but it kind of was like the size of a Termagant. And these things are supposed to be able to like rip through Terminator armor, so I had to make it much bigger. The proportions might be a little bit off if we're going to look at these next to like the old school figures. If you put a Space Hulk Genestealer next to an old Firstborn Marine, these are probably a little bit more chunky. The head's a bit bigger, the claws are slightly larger, but these are all exaggerated proportions because as always I'm going for the action figure look here. But I'm really, really happy with these things. As I said, they're like one of my favourite toys that I've ever made, so I'd love to know what you think. Please let me know down in the comments below. What do you reckon? Do you think I nailed it? Do you think I need to go back to the drawing board? Do you think I could have done them better? Do you think they'd work better in different colours? Let me know down in the comments below. Something else that I always get asked as well is, are my STLs available anywhere? And usually I say no, they're not available anywhere. If it's a figure that I've created myself, that's usually a toy that I'm going to make in resin and sell. If it's something that's based on an existing IP, I can't really sell that because I don't own the IP. But something that I can do is give them away, which is something that I'm going to be doing from now over on my Patreon. I've created a new tier on there where you're going to get access to some of the STLs that I make, starting off with these ones, these Genestealer inspired alien figures. They're on there right now. So if you head over to patreon.com/SlimeHouseTV and join my STL tier, you'll be able to download this thing right now, and I can't wait to see people paint it and tag me in it and what they do with it and that kind of thing, printing it in various sizes or whatever. The standard one is in this size, but you can print it in whatever size you want. And I'm going to keep adding to this tier and things. I'm going to keep adding to it as I go on. I've got lots of like STLs in my back catalogue and things. I'm going to be putting them up every month and stuff. So yeah, if you want my STLs, the first one that's ever available is available right now over at patreon.com/SlimeHouseTV, and you'll be able to print yourself one of these bad boys. Enjoy. I also mentioned earlier when I was talking about the airbrush that the company that make that Bartsharp sent me something to give away to you lot, and that is an SBO4 airbrush booth. It's the one down from the one that I'm using, and it's the one up from the one that I used in Italy. Really nice airbrush, and if you could make use of that, then all you've got to do is let me know down below what you're working on right now. If you've got a project that you're working on in the future, and if you think that airbrush would be helpful to you, then let me know down below. I'll pick one of those at random, and then Bartsharp will send that out to you. So yeah, if you're getting into airbrushing, toy making, or anything like that, then I can't recommend enough getting your own airbrush booth. And if you want one, then yeah, enter that little competition that we're doing, a little giveaway, a little giving something back. I've also linked that waterfall airbrush down below if you want to check out one of those in particular, and that's also my affiliate link as well. So if you do fancy buying one and you go through that, I get a little kickback, which is always nice, but it's never expected, always appreciated, but never necessary. I would highly recommend that waterfall spray booth though. A lot of people were asking me before, like, what is that? And yeah, it's the one. I've got some really cool stuff that I'm working on in the background. I feel like I've been a bit quiet over the past few weeks on YouTube, but I haven't been quiet in like my real life. I've been working on some really cool stuff that I can't wait to talk about in the future. Something else happened really cool a few days ago. I got paid a visit by probably the biggest Warhammer YouTuber in the country, Guy from Midwinter Minis. He was up north, so he called around the studio for a bit, and while he was here, I also gave him a blank one of these things to take home and paint, so that's very awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing that on his channel at some point. Make sure you follow him. I'll link him down below as well, so you can go and follow his channel and keep a lookout for that. So I think that's everything that I needed to get through today. As always, I want to say a massive thank you to everybody that takes the time to watch my videos every single week. I can't wait to see what you do with the STL of this figure. If you download one, I can't wait to see it. So please like tag me on Instagram if you do print one and paint it yourself, because I think it's going to be awesome to see what everybody does with them. As I just said, I've got some really cool stuff lined up in the future, and I can't wait to get to those videos and show you everything else that I've been working on, and I hope to catch you in them videos when I do finally drop them. But until then, I'm Theo Kane, this is Slimehouse TV, these are my retro reimagined action figures, and I'm gone. Pa!